right, you guys ready to get started?
Yeah.
All right. So I gotta pull up my script because I don't know how to run these meetings still, you know. All right, good evening. It is 7 p.m. on June 7th. I would like to call the regular meeting of the Royal Oak Aging in Place Task Force to order. Due to the semi-virtual nature of this meeting, all voting and attendance will be done through roll call. We're going to go through as everyone appears on my screen. Please state aye and where you are broadcasting from. We'll start with Sue Wells.
Sue Wells, Royal Oak.
Joan Johnson.
Royal Oak.
Susan McKee.
Susan McKee, also in Royal Oak.
Okay. Commissioner Douglas.
Here in Royal Oak.
Paul Webb, welcome. We're doing roll call. Where do you say aye and where you're calling in from?
Hi, Paul Webb, calling in from Royal Oak.
And myself, Sarah Ginninger, here live in City Hall. All right, we have a couple of new people with us today, so I'm going to let Erin introduce herself as well as Susan before we get started with our regular meeting. So Erin, if you want to start first.
Hi everybody, Erin Cook. I am assistant coordinator and chef at the M&M Senior Center, Royal Oak.
Awesome, welcome, thank you. And Susan, the fourth Susan to the team.
Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Barkman. I'm the new assistant to the city manager, so I'm finally replacing James, and I'm excited to be here.
And from what Commissioner Douglas and I met with her, it's been worth the wait for over a year. So we're excited to have all of you. So thank you everyone for joining. So moving on to the next agenda item, which is approval of the May 3rd meeting minutes.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Okay. Do we have any discussion on that motion? All right, call for a vote and everyone appears on my screen. We'll start with Commissioner Douglas.
Aye.
Joan Johnson.
Aye.
Paul Webb.
Aye.
Susan McKee.
Aye.
Sue Wells.
Aye.
Sarah. Aye. Before we go any further, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm trying to project my voice so you can hear me, so I don't want to miss anyone. All right, let's talk about the agenda. Does everyone have the agenda in front of me? Are we ready to approve that, or are there anything we need to add? All right, motion to approve. Somebody speak up.
Aye.
All right, Sue. Anyone second?
Joan.
Paul.
All right, Joan seconds. And any discussion on that motion? If not, we'll vote. Oh, I'm just going to start in random order. We're going to try to do this in alphabetical order today. So Joan, you start first.
Aye.
All right, Paul.
Aye.
Sarah. Aye. Shar.
Aye.
Oh, now I got to get into the Susans and the Sues. Sue Wells.
Aye.
Susan McKee.
Aye.
All right, I'm done with that order because that was confusing. All right. I appreciate you guys. All right, Susan, I think you already introduced yourself, but our first order of business is introduction of Susan Barkman, assistant to the city manager. You want to give us a little background and kind of tell us how you ended up in this fabulous city?
Sure. So I grew up in Michigan and have been in Colorado for the last 16 years, and I'm excited to come back home and be working here in Royal Oak where my nieces live. So I'm excited to be around a little bit more. I previously worked as a neighborhood liaison in Aurora, Colorado, as well is in the mayor and council office and had a brief stint as the interim city clerk for a little while too. So did a bunch of different stuff there.
Well, welcome. Anyone have any questions or want to ask Susan anything before we get started? All right.
All I would like to say is welcome aboard.
Yes, we're excited to have you. We're excited. And I think I mentioned earlier that Shar and I did meet with her, I think last week or sometime recently. Time still is a little fuzzy for some of us in this room. Me. And kind of brought her up to speed, talked about what we're doing, why we're doing it. Shar ceremoniously handed over Stephanie's incredibly well curated notebooks that she had on this, so the meticulous notes of Stephanie. So Susan was able to be the recipient of those. So sure, she's had a few minutes to look at that. I'm sure it was really actually very helpful. I'm sure it was. I have no doubt. She was meticulous. She and Susan McKee and Joan are very meticulous. I haven't had this much. So, all right. Moving on to the next order of business. Sue McKee had reached out to me and talked to me about we have identified our vision and our mission statement, but one more piece of that is value statements. And I couldn't remember where we landed on creating those for this group, so I thought I'd bring it back and talk about it while Susan McKee is here, so that we can figure out if that's something we want to move forward with or how we want to approach those. And Susan, if you want to provide any more context around pros or cons, or however you want to talk through that a little bit.
Yeah, I just kind of raised it. I wasn't at the last meeting, and I know that you were able to vote on the vision and mission, which were great. So then the question that I just felt that we needed to address was whether we wanted to take that a step further and also include some value statements with that. I think it's an important piece. That's just my perspective on it. So I don't know how others feel about it.
What's an example, I guess, an example of like what a value statement would be? I guess I don't necessarily like we have this incredible vision and mission, but like what's that next level layer for? What does that help us achieve?
If you look at some of the plans from other communities, most of them also include values. And I think that they can be really important just to help make sure we're all coming at it from the same perspective around the importance of, they are exactly what they're stated to be, right? So what are the values that are sort of directing this work? I think they play a really important role in sort of keeping everybody, focused on that.
What's everyone's thoughts?
I agree. I think the values statement would bring to the table what our strongest feelings are, what we determine to be it's not really a framework. It's more of a value statement. What do we see that's important in the work that we are doing, and will help kind of guide us in whatever our actions are, to say, do they support this value? So the value is kind of like, why are we doing this? And I think it's pretty important to have that framed out. It's a difference between, mission statement's fine and all that, but what is the undergirding of what is it that we are about? And I think that's what the values statement would help us do.
Okay. I think one thing would be interesting, and we don't have to necessarily tackle it tonight. Does the city have value statements?
We do.
Okay.
So Sue McKee, give an example of a value statement.
Okay, so I was just pulling some up. So Portland, age-friendly Portland, their values were stated really simply. They had respect, inclusion, equity, diversity, interdependence among generations. So that's what an example of Portland's. And many of them are similar to that. So it's just kind of reinforcing those ideas so that like the action plan, that all of those are kind of bearing in mind what those values are, that, you know, that we're being driven to do this work based on making sure that it's an inclusive, welcoming, et cetera, community.
So in that context, I would call our vision statement the why of our existence, and the mission statement the what we're going to do of our existence, and this would be the how we're going to operate framework.
Yes, with a very broad lens to, yes.
Yeah, I don't know that the city has, the commission has not, in the time that I've been on the commission, sat down and articulated something like that. We have our civil rights ordinance, which articulates a lot of that, but in a windy way. But it would contain the essence of what we as a city believe in. So maybe that would be a place to start. And then I was also here thumbing through the Royal Oak Civic Foundation, because we have crafted values statements that might be another good jumping off point. Although you mentioned Portland, I hadn't looked specifically at Portland's plan, but those are definitely the ideas or concepts that I think it should embody.
Right. And even looking at, and I know we've all been looking at the plans a little bit, and there are some great ideas in plans that have already been established that might help us to sort of formulate some initial thoughts around that too, right? Without recreating the wheel necessarily.
Right.
Yeah.
The city of Southfield had a good one too. They had one where they talked about the vision and then they identified the core values.
Right.
So it was two separate items. The vision.
Yeah, I did the Southfield, so that's good that you read it. I wasn't able to look at theirs. What were they?
They identified their vision and how this project fits in with the community. And then their core values are, being part of the community voice, respect for inclusion, collaboration, outreach, promotion, volunteerism, and development of innovative and ethical solutions.
Yeah, when I look at Boston, their guiding principles is what they call them, are cultural and linguistic diversity, generational interdependence, clear and consistent communication, combat ageism, and creative partnerships. What? We trust Boston. Okay. So it sounds like this is something that we want to do. Do we want to tackle that this evening? That's a perfect response, Paul.
So what if we were to do this, as Sue McKee says, rather than reinvent the wheel, create a Google Doc that we can all edit, and all of us kind of copy it or retype and paste into that document other organizations' values and the source, and then we can look at it and maybe mash those together at our next meeting?
Okay.
It sounds reasonable. I don't want to make something off the cuff and then come back later and go, what planet was I on when I thought that was a good idea?
For sure. So everyone's on board with homework is what I've heard.
Yep.
Okay. And I know that I am working with Carol to find some solution for us as a task force, the city has asked, like, city solution on sharing documents, but maybe.
I have been told IT has a program called OneDrive that they had on the simmer burner. And I told them they should turn that up to boil because there are now 2 commissioners asking for this for 2 groups, and that should rise to the level of importance now that we're all moved into all of our buildings.
Okay.
Actually, Carol, I'm asking on behalf of 2 groups, so that's 3 separate requests.
There we go. There we go.
Now it should be boiling over.
Darn it.
That's right. Now it's hot, hot, hot. Okay.
So
That's a great idea. So Commissioner, you'll send that link to everybody and we can all noodle on it.
Yep.
I will send out a reminder 1 week prior that we have homework due.
perfect. Just a reminder. So Sarah, I heard you mention that you weren't able to access Southfield's plan. I think Southfield and Auburn Hills are harder to find online. I believe those have been emailed out to everyone,
Okay.
along with East Lansing. So it's kind of nice to see what the sort of local people have been doing. So if you haven't had a chance to look at them, they should be buried in your email somewhere. Or if people don't have them, I can resend them if needed.
Okay. So to summarize value statement, it is a yes, it is a homework, it is a noodle homework, hash out next month, right? Is that a summary? I'm trying to keep Erin, keep her up to speed here. So we're noodling on this and we'll hash it out next month. All right. So we also had homework this time about reviewing other city plans elements for consideration. So does anybody have any that they saw and liked or didn't like? I have some notes here.
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah.
Can I go back for a second? If you go to the AARP age-friendly section of their website, and I could send this link out if you like, and look for the list of states and then click on Michigan. Auburn Hills plan is right there online. Southfield's plan is online.
Yeah, Southfield, it's an error when I try to click on it. So I know where to find it. I just couldn't get to it. So no big deal. I looked at Auburn Hills.
Yeah.
Maybe it was Auburn Hills I couldn't look at. I looked at Southfield. Sorry.
I'm looking at Southfield now, and I read Auburn Hills earlier today.
Okay. I couldn't get to it. So no big deal.
Okay.
I looked at a couple, and I can throw mine out there to get this conversation started. Boston's 2017 plan is probably my favorite. I remember looking at a ton of them from Susan, and the things that I liked for it, there was some visual graphics of like some really nice kind of easy to read numbers. It was visually representative. It was big and bold. I like the we envision, we heard, we are, we will in the way of presenting information. I saw that in a couple of them, and I really think that does a good job of summarizing what we're looking to do, kind of summarizing the task force things, the things that we're doing, as well as creating our action plans. I did like their full list of all the action plans and kind of a summary of by year at the end that they had, as well as I love all the pictures of the community that they included in it. So I can show you here. Southfield was interesting. They had a lot about the online survey, but like they don't have any numbers. So for me, like all the pie charts, it's really hard to decipher like what those are actually telling you. I mean, you can only look at it if it looks like it's a third versus, you know, they all start to look alike visually without any kind of numbers on it. So that's something I thought about. I looked at their action plans. And I didn't feel like they were very like concrete on dates, like when they expected to achieve them. And then the other one I just randomly selected was Northfield, Minnesota. They included the values, so I did like that they included that. They used that same we envision, we heard, we are. I also thought, again, their actions needed some dates and some elaboration. It was just very much like, we're gonna increase this. And it was very quick and easy. It was easy to read, but I wasn't really sure what, like, how to measure it. I think that's what I was trying to say. They didn't have any way of like, how would we know that that was successful? So I think measurement is an important part of our action plan so that we can say at the end of 3 years, how do we know we did it or we accomplished it? So I think that's an important part of action plans. So that's what I came up with. I can keep digging, but that's where I was. So did anybody else have any?
I like Boston. I also went out and took a look at Colorado Springs.
Okay.
And what I liked most about Colorado Springs was they listed, and I don't know where they found all these people, but they had more than a handful of partners. They had some nonprofits that they brought on board. So they listed every group that they were working with, that they interfaced with to support the project that they were on. And they ended up partnering, working with a group, a nonprofit that had to do with aging. And this aging group was delighted to work with the city. So they got a lot of energy and effort from this other group. Now, Colorado Springs is about 14 times size of Royal Oak. And that was, I think, a consideration. But if you have an opportunity to go to look at what Colorado Springs did and how they structured their report, I found it very interesting. I also liked one of the reports that had, here's what we know today, and here's what we're missing that we want to add in to this particular process, which I thought's really helped. Here's where we are, here are the gaps. And then the action plan tried to fulfill those gaps. I thought Southfield was action plan light. I really couldn't figure out how what they were doing was actually going to make some difference in Southfield. And I thought their organization was, well, relatively odd. I would think you would want to present your information one domain at a time and not split it up the way that Southfield did, which is another reason I liked what Colorado Springs did. There's also a town in Vermont, they're a little smaller, but I really liked what they did with theirs as well, is they're looking at, here's our community, this is why we're doing what we're doing. Here is the historical data of this town, and here's what the projections are, and this is how we're going to try to meet those projections. Housing is a big deal. I focus mostly on that from all the reports that I read, because there just isn't available housing. I don't care where you go. Colorado Springs, I thought, was kind of interesting, and they were going to change zoning laws so that they could create these small little groups, housing groups, so that they could more efficiently hook the transportation to them. Because like other large cities, where do they expand? They expand outward. And we all know the Wild West has plenty of outward to go to. But once you do that, then all of your city services become thinned because you have to reach out so far to get the people to, get the services that people need. So I thought some of that might be useful for Royal Oak, in that, how do we create services that blend all age groups together, which is what Colorado Springs is trying to do. And how do we structure, we look around Royal Oak and what kind of housing are we seeing going up? And, and you get those 2.5-story places. Those are not very good for seniors. And how do we take, even the condos, they're just not affordable downtown. So when we look at our kind of our goals about what we want to do, I think it might be useful for each of us for our very areas that we're focusing on. What do these other communities do that we think might work here? Which is sort of why I was looking at housing to see what they're doing. As far as the elements of the report, I like color coding, and I think that's what a lot of these reports did. Housing was one color. The parks and the buildings was another color, either by banner or something, so that you always knew what section you were in. And photographs are nice and color is wonderful, but the content really has to be there. And that's why when I looked at Southfield, I wasn't quite sure. They weren't very clear about where they were going. And that's why I liked Boston. Boston was really obvious about what they were doing. And Colorado Springs has a lot to say in that regard as well. But both Boston and Colorado Springs looked like they went to a professional publishing company. They obviously had some money, and I don't know if we're going to have enough money to be able to swing that. That's not saying that the City of Royal Oaks Publishing Department can't handle it, but I'm just wondering, you know, they were slick, basically, and I don't mind that, but I also want to make sure that what we put in there is something that people are going to read and they will continue to use over time. We're really at the beginning, and this thing is going to move on.
Right. Putting together a slick document is the easy part. I mean, that's just InDesign. I mean, I've had multiple classes on how to use InDesign. We can make it look good. I think the content is by far the most important part of it. So I think we can figure out what it looks like and we can make ours look great. I'm guessing you were talking about Newport, Vermont, since that was the only city under Vermont, but I just wanted to confirm for others in this. Okay. Who else?
I checked, I did Southfields, but I agree there was a lot of graphs and information, but the content was not there as much as it could have been, I think. And not to tear, and no means, it was a wonderful piece, but for the information we're trying to get, I think we could provide it in a different way. I must be wanting to go on vacation because I picked Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Okay.
But they very strategically did a very good job in outlining how they presented their information. One thing that they did address was COVID, which I thought was interesting. And they may be in other plans, but this was the first plan that I heard about COVID. Another component that, and we just got talking about it, were values, is each one of the domains had a value, their own separate value. And, that's how they identified the values in their proposal. And then it's a very lengthy piece, but there's a lot of good information. They also identified by domain their partners and their partners, their nonprofits, and their groups that they work with.
And they have a city of highlights of services and amenities. Talking about Sue?
Yes.
Okay. And they have resources in here. And their livability index according to the AARP.
So I thought it was a good piece.
Yeah.
So that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Sue. When you visit Albuquerque, you let us know how it goes and how well they're doing. You can report back. Okay.
I will let you know what the livability index is.
Okay. You let us know.
I looked at Cleveland, Ohio's. They had a lot of detail, obviously, but they had like a chart of after everything, this were the 20 steps they were going to take. And then
Okay.
they had a chart of which domains that they impacted.
Okay.
So some were working with, city organizations that already pushed to do these things, and it impacted each of the 8 domains, or one action plan to reduce falls in seniors impacted outdoor spaces and however else, inclusion. So it was nice to get like a quick, okay, these are the 20 steps. It's going to impact all of these situations. And then further down, there was a separate page of this is the action, these are the goals, this is how we're going to get there. So you could look at it, go, okay, I can see this is going to impact all 8 areas of my life. And then go back further, get more details as to how. And then the other one I looked at was Fishers, Indiana. And the way they put it together, they have their domain, the goal, and then action, like concrete actions. And then they also noted which ones were year 1 action steps and which ones were also in like the city's grand plan for like 2040 or something. So I think it kind of goes to incorporating what's already happening in Royal Oak to help with our plan to kind of solidify that those are good actions to take place, and we can help supplement whatever city service is already working towards that. I enjoyed that. I'm not big on graphics and stuff, so.
So I think one thing, Susan, you and I will need to work through is we're going to need some like census data on those types of things for like the beginning of the report. Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I, like Paul, looked at Cleveland's report and gravitated toward the same things that he described. One part of it being that they describe their existing programs and services, or those that are like currently funded or being handled, so that you knew what you needed to add to what already existed. And the wording they used was, they described the current state of the domain and then the desired state of the domain. And yeah, I very much liked their table approach with, what are we going to do? Who's in charge of it? What's the deadline? How will we know what we succeeded? And Boston did that too, very nicely. I, like everyone else, I like Boston's approach. And I think what they did was, I think it was Boston, their main document was well summarized, and then they had strong addenda and at the end, and exhibits at the end. So if people really want to dive into the demographic data and the study, they can, but let's not load the top of the document with that. Let's let people get into the meat of it. The city is going to be, God willing and the creek don't rise, doing a new master plan beginning in the coming fiscal year 2021. And that will take us a couple of years. But we here in our task force will be ahead of the game and will be in a position to take our recommendations and just inject them right into the master plan, or perhaps make our document part of that master plan. So I think we're in a good position there to really have some influence. A question that I have is, and again, touching on some things that others have said, I think each domain should have, someone said values, or each domain should have an overarching goal. And a question I think we want to ask is it up to us as the task force to define each domain's goals, or is it up to the work groups once they've heard the results of our research, heard information about our existing state, that is what is already existing and happening, and should we leave it up to the work groups to then define a goal for their domain?
I think we should table that in parking lot for a hot second, Sharks. I'd like to hear from Susan McKee, and then I think we need to come back to it, because I think that's part of like, what do we want to start to develop for these work groups? And I think that's a great question, but can we table that so we can hear from Susan?
Oh yeah, I never intended to discuss it at this
Okay, got it. So Susan,
So I'm going to talk in very generalized way because I wrote very good notes from several of the plans I looked at, and those notes are sitting on my desk at work. So,
Well, that's okay. So you can just scan them, take a picture and send them to us.
yeah, I will, because there were some pieces I tried to go through because I've noticed that the plans that have been written more recently, how they've approached it is a bit different than some of the original plans, right? Because each group has learned from the experiences of those that have gone before them. So I was mindful when I was pulling plans to pull some of the more current ones to get some ideas to see how they sort of built off of some of what the other communities have done. So I will maybe put that in a written form of some kind, because I know I'll miss some of it. But just touching on some of the points that others have made as well, I think one of the pieces with Boston and Shar, you just touched on that too, is that front half of the plan, how accessible the information is. Right, it's easy to digest. It's in small, written in such a way that it's very accessible for people to kind of get through and understand what it is that they're working towards. So I think that that's just a really nice way to make sure that like Southfield, I think, did a huge amount of work in creating their document, but with all of that data at the beginning, it's hard to get through that before you get to sort of what is the plan and what are they hoping to do and hoping to achieve. A couple of other points, Auburn Hills, and there's one of the things that they included that I thought could be helpful was they, in addition to kind of identifying what their action steps were going to be, and they broke those down really well, they also identified potential obstacles to those and how might those obstacles be addressed. So may or may not be something we want to incorporate, but I think it can be a helpful discussion when you're thinking ahead to implementation, for sure. So those are just some of my key thoughts, but I apologize for my absent-mindedness, but I'll write up my notes and get those to you.
Unforgivable, but we're gonna let it slide this one time. Erin, if you can mark a note, make a note of that in the meeting minutes.
That's right.
I really appreciate it.
I will mention, I think it was Grand Rapids. One of the things that they did was they acknowledged right from the get-go that they had pulled plans from other leaders in this, so that they identified which community plans they had looked to, and that the working groups also then utilize some of that information to help sort of initiate conversation. So I think some of that can be a really helpful approach too when we're thinking ahead to how the working groups look and what that process looks like.
Agreed. Thanks, Susan. Appreciate it. Appreciate all of you doing such a deep dive on these. I think we obviously learn a lot each time we look at them. I think, like Joan mentioned, like we start to learn about potential solutions and ideas and all that kind of stuff. So do you think that's an important element as we start to transition into things we want to cover I said into the meeting, but this is really our domain work group kickoff. So that's what happens when I type really fast and I'm absent-minded. So if you can make a note of that here in the meeting minutes, that I did not define this well in the agenda, but I think it's time to start thinking about what that kickoff looks like. What do we need to have packaged and ready for them? I think to Shara's point, like, do each of them create value statements? How do we want them to approach and start to put some of that templated work together, right? I think we have some ideas and we'll have to start to really summarize the things, like the key elements that we want to include. I heard, just to summarize the other plans, it sounds like we really want to make sure that we have a good list of what's already in place. So some type of inventory of resources, and groups that we already have current working relationships with that may help some of these task force. So I think we probably need to work together to compile that. I don't know what that looks like off the top of my head, but would we all agree that that's one thing that we want to have accessible for our work groups?
I think so. I mean, when I was reading the reports, every community already has some groups that are working in parallel to where the task force would be going.
Yeah.
And rather than reinvent the wheel, they tag those work groups and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Would you be interested in participating in what we are doing? So they essentially combined resources. And in the case of Colorado Springs, the city was one group, and then there was this steering committee, us in a sense, and then there was this nonprofit group, and boy, did they take, the nonprofit group just went, wow, this is really what we want to do. And so they went 90% gung-ho at this thing. And I think that Colorado Springs was beneficial in tagging these other groups and saying, hey, do you want to play? I think we may find the same thing. I think there are people out there that are working on similar aspects to what we want to do. And it would seem to be to our benefit to have them piggyback, or we piggyback on what they're doing.
Well, and Joan, I think the other side of that is if we don't, or at least reach out to them to see if they want to be either part of the task force or how can we partner. I think there's multiple options there, but I think we need to get a better understanding of what's even in the community. I don't feel like I have a good comprehensive view of what's available. So
I sure don't. I mean, I don't either. I want to take a tiny step back and mention one of the elements that I thought was very important to several of the reports that I read is here's our community. How long have we been around? What are we about? What's our historical past?
Yep.
And that showed up in Boston. It showed up in the Vermont one. It showed up in Auburn Hills. I mean, pretty much there was this, here we are, here's who we are as a community, and this is why we want to do this. What the overall bang for our buck is going to be. We're not trying to change our historical view of things. And as a matter of fact, some of these groups use the Historical Society to help them out. Maybe just to provide information, I'm not sure. And the library was a big one in all of these as a group that they partnered with. So
no, that's good to
food
know.
for thought.
I agree that we obviously need to present, like, I like the letters from the commissioner and the letter from the mayor, like the reasons that we want to do these things, the importance of it, the why, like that to me is just like the context that leads into it. So I don't disagree that we'll want a few pages of that. I think like painting a picture of what the community looks like and the trajectory it's on, right? Like we're doing this because the trajectory of people that we want to age in place is changing, right? So that's a fundamental group that we're targeting. It's not necessarily that they're there now, but we're seeing that people aren't leaving. So how do we meet their needs for the whole journey? So I appreciate that we need to do that kind of information.
I think just a note on some of that discussion too is, so the AARP action plan, they have kind of spelled out all of these pieces that have to be incorporated into it. And it includes a lot of what we're talking about, right? And the SMART goals piece and all of that sort of thing. So like they, in order to approve the plan, require all of these components to be part of the report. So it helps to sort of at least give us a bit of a framework to jump from. And then how we structure that is up to us.
Okay, good call out though, Joan. Thank you for reminding us that we do need to, we can't just jump into we're taking action. As much as we want to move the needle here. So let's talk about our kickoff meeting. I think we've identified September as kind of our general target date, right? Sometime in September.
Yep.
So in order for us to feel good about that meeting, it seems like we have checked vision, we checked mission statements, so we've got that. We would want to include the vision and mission statements. We need to present we'll need to give them an overview of why we're doing this, right? Like some background, because not everyone's going to know automatically. Agreed?
What it is.
Yeah, like what it is, the domains. I think we need to define the domains. Do we want to have, for that meeting, that list of resources and groups? Or is that something that we just need for them to develop? Or how do we want to approach that?
Well, I think a lot of those groups we had kind of brainstormed previously when we came up with our whole list of potential stakeholders, right? So we spent pretty much a whole meeting kind of pulling out all of the people or groups from whether they were Royal Oak specific or region specific that we felt might have something to contribute to this. So I think we revisit that and then figure out who might be invited to the kickoff as part of, their role as a potential stakeholder.
Okay.
I think we have to have some presentation of the data, like what did we learn? And so right now that feels like the data is sort of this big and we need to what were some of the key lessons? I think we need to share some of that with the whole group.
Yep. I think the other thing I'm thinking that we need to probably help them identify is understand roles, kind of key roles, and then I think expectations in the timeline. Because I remember Susan and I sitting in that meeting in that February, and we were like, oh, we thought this was for like 3 months, and it's really for 3 years.
3 years, yeah.
It was a little shocking. I remember Susan, I was like,
Yeah, great.
I was like, I don't remember signing up for the rest of my life. So, okay.
I remember reading, and I'm not going to remember which community, but they, for their kickoff, did sort of the big thing, and then they actually split off into their domain groups and did these like little small groups sort of to get the momentum going for the individual groups.
Okay.
And I'm just throwing ideas out. I'm not suggesting.
On the table.
Yeah.
So we want it, you said this, but I'll elaborate on it and tell people what the schedule of work group meetings is going to be. And I'm going to recommend that we establish dates, firm dates that those work groups will meet over the course of the coming fiscal year. I mean, that's just it. That's when it meets. Be there or be square. And we may want to lump them together. That is, find a big enough space, a common space where we can do 3 groups on night A and 3 groups on night B. But I'm just some way to consolidate resources.
I think that's an idea. The other thing that I was thinking of is either that or you leave it to their own devices and you establish key milestones that they have to like report out things. And if they have to meet 15 times to get there versus 3, like I think you can do it. I don't necessarily love leaving it to their own devices, but I'm just saying, I don't know if because what if we say you on housing only needs to meet 4 times to get to there, but communication needs to meet, feels like they don't get there at the same rate. I guess, how do we account for that? I'm just playing devil's advocate, Shar.
No, that's fine.
I think it's helpful to have an overall, the large view plan to say, we want to be, here's the benchmark we want to meet at the quarter part, at the halfway part, after the 3/4 part. And then each work group can figure out how many meetings they need to have to achieve the benchmarks that have been established, so that all the domains are working on the same, essentially the same timeline, even though they may meet more often to achieve that. Otherwise, we may have domains that finish early and sit around there twiddling their thumbs, waiting for the rest of us to catch up. I don't know that we want to, I think we have to determine amongst ourselves what makes sense with a large view of when do we think we can be at this point? And then the groups can meet to do that. I mean, some of these groups meet 6 times and they're done. I mean, some of the reports that I read, yeah, we met 6 times. I don't know if that was 6 weekends or 6 days. I have no idea, and I don't know. And I don't feel like I have a really good firm grasp on how long it should take to put together these goals and the action plans for the particular domains. We have to save enough time to pull all of them together to create the report. So I'm thinking, if we know when we want the report, then we have to back up to say, then we have to have all of this data by, kind of work backwards into when and then find out we should have started last fall.
We already know the answer to that.
So one of the things that I remember hearing from some of the communities is, so the work groups do the work and identify all of their ideas around what the actions and the changes that they want to see might be. But the actual action steps, or a lot of that was not necessarily developed within those working groups. So they might, which is why they might have only had to meet 3 or 4 times or 5 or 6 times, because they would digest all the data, look at where the gaps are, come up with their ideas, and then it would be the task force or the writing group that would take that information and make it usable. Does that make sense? So they didn't necessarily have to really formalize everything within the working group.
Yeah.
To me that makes sense, because if you've got a work group of 20 people, good luck trying to come up with an action plan. It just,
that's why I think we said 10 to 12, Dawn.
it's kind of unwieldy.
Yeah,
but if you have all the data that you need, and we can define what data is that we need, then a small group of people like the task force could in fact create the action plans.
So we could say, let's do this. Let's get on Char's path, and Susan, kind of where you were. So we have one meeting, we kick it off. Their next meeting is start to go through the data or come up with their value statements, right? Their third meeting is starting to look at the data, and maybe after that first meeting, they have to go look at some of these other reports in their domain. They get a little homework. Then they come back in the third one, they start to really comb through and get deep into the data. The fourth and fifth ones maybe is where they do all the brainstorming. Then maybe the sixth one is where they prioritize it, kind of what they think would be maybe we even just go with short, medium, and long-term kind of goals, just get into that framework of what they think. And then maybe we take a month and we craft them into what we want to report out on. And then we have one more wrap-up meeting with them to review it, to make sure to gut check with them that we interpreted it the right way. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm just trying to kind of balance the million meetings for one group and 2 meetings for another group. But if we kind of set those milestones, if they feel that they need to meet in between those, I guess that's up to them. We say those are some of our key check-in points or something. I don't know, what are your guys' thoughts around something like that? And I'm just thinking off the top of my head, so we can vet it out a little better if we need to.
As someone who needs structure to be timely, I think if we set a minimum of meetings, kickoff meeting, big group, then your small groups, these are the 6 dates that are scheduled. If you're going to be in this group, show up or be square, like Shar said, and then it's up to each group to add visits or add meetings. But to sit here and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Here's the group you're in. Now go. It's going to take us an hour to set a meeting schedule with 10 to 12 people. Let's set that forward. And if we need to add on each group, we can add. But I think leaving it up to each group to determine, we're just going to talk in circles for 90 minutes.
Okay. So I think let's put I think we need to, if we're going to set the minimum meetings, like kind of what we did is each group, like what's kind of the objective of the meeting, so we know that every group's working towards the same thing. What were you going to say, Char? I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Well, yeah, and further in support of my cause, I mean, if we're talking about 6 groups and let's just hypothesize that each of them meets 5 times, that's 30 meetings that have to be held in a public or accessible space, duly noticed by staff because they are public meetings. Which puts in, and Carol's gonna like raise her hand and say, hallelujah, thank you, because that's a lot of administrative work. Thus my idea that we, 3 groups meet on, day A and 3 groups meet on day B, and that consolidates a lot of that for staff. And if it's not Carol, it's gonna be Susan, Susan Barkman, who's gonna be picking up that.
No.
Joke there.
No, and I agree. I'm not disagreeing at all. I just want to make sure that we've thought through all the pros and cons of all of it. And before I'm just trying to be, I think it's kind of a nightmare any way you go about it. I see where they might need more time is around the data piece. Like, so maybe we can package it up and get it to them at that first meeting so that they can start to really, and knowing that by the 3rd meeting is when they're going to review it, because we've kind of given them topics or objectives for those, so they can start to really wrap their head around it, right? So that they can start to have a healthy discussion by that 3rd or 4th meeting around data. I mean, because the data is the most undigestible piece of stuff they're going to have to do, right? I mean, it's objective. It's objective. It's a lot. It's,
I think the earlier that they have the domain information, the better.
Okay.
I think
my domain information, John.
We did all these surveys and then we divided up into domains, and so each domain has this big stack of information.
Okay.
And I think on opening night, where we introduce the entire process to these folks, that's the night that whatever domain that they're in, that's when they should get this big stack of stuff.
Okay.
We know how long it took us to wade through these things and hit the high points.
Yep.
And a lot of these people are not going to be familiar. I mean, they're going to come in not running, and I think we would make their life a little easier. And I'm in agreement with Paul. I think we should have specific dates set up. I like Char's idea because we have an administrative staff we can't kill because they need to do the work at the end. So we have to be cognizant of the energy drain that's going to be on them. The community may want to listen in on this stuff. And so we have to be aware of where we're going to have these meetings and how we're going to do them, and hope that COVID is cooperative with us and we don't have to do them via Zoom. We may have to. And so we'll see how all of that goes. I really think the more structure we have with it, it'll bother some people, But Paul and I will be perfectly happy having a lot of structure.
Well, as long as you and Paul are happy, that is really the key to this whole thing. So like,
Thank you. We appreciate this. Thank you. Thank you.
That's our value statement, isn't it?
Yeah.
structure. Happiness for Joan and Paul. The rest of us, just, we don't care. As long as Paul and Joan are happy.
Well,
I'm happy too.
Yes, okay, Cheryl will be too. So,
you are gonna have to have a
yes,
schedule because we only have so many spaces and so many nights available. We can't just willy-nilly throw them around, so we are gonna have to stick to a schedule. Like Mondays are taken, a couple of Tuesdays are already taken. I'm gonna suggest Shar's 3 and 3 that we pick Wednesday, Thursday. And that we look at that and that we get them scheduled and give them priority in the room so that the rooms don't get booked up. We have adequate meeting space at the new city hall, but we want to make sure that we book these rooms so that they don't get taken, and we have to work around other things like this room becomes completely unavailable from about mid-October on for election. So we have some other operational considerations in the building, and I do think it's very important to map that out for sure.
so I'm gonna take an action item. I'm gonna put together a rough schedule of what this looks like. I'm not gonna put domains in there, but I'm just gonna put in the 6 meetings and then start some dates. I'm just gonna throw some random dates, like in September. We'll figure it out. But Carol's gonna give me dates that are available apparently. We'll figure out something, but we'll come up with a schedule. But I think the most important thing is that we have some key reasons for them to be meeting and what they're gonna meet about on those particular dates. So I'll start to put some structure around that. I will also outline things that I think we need to put in the kickoff meeting. So these will start in October. Working domain groups will start in October.
Once a month?
I don't know if it's once a month. What are you guys' thoughts about timing? I mean, I think that's the thing we also haven't figured out. Susan Barkman and I need to get on the phone with Karen, I think, and really figure out when we have to have this report in. Is she gonna make it March, or are we gonna make it next September? So I'm not sure I can answer that until I'll set up a call with Karen. I'll reach out a call with Karen and Barkman. I can't put another Susan on here.
I'd encourage you, rather than ask Karen when it's.
No, I'm going to tell her.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell her that we will have our final report by
This is
September 2025.
This is what we're anticipating based on,
Before that, Susan and you and I will kind of work out what's going to happen in the timeline. So I don't want her to think that we're sandbagging. So I will create a little bit of a timeline for us, so you and I feel comfortable that that is a realistic date for us as well, and she understands what we're accomplishing between now and then, so that we don't look like we are sandbagging. No, and I agree. I'm pretty much just advising her to expect our report, and we can negotiate from there. She hasn't reached out since last time she talked to us, Susan, so I don't feel like she's in a big rush for it. So I feel like we have some wiggle room. What are you laughing at, Joan? I was supposed to follow up with her in March.
I was just thinking that as part of this thing that we have to work in, there's momentum. Once we get going, how do we maintain the momentum? And if we drag these meetings out for 9 months,
I'm not dragging it out for 9 months. I think they have to be done in.
Yeah, that's right.
5 months, I think, is probably reasonable.
Because you could start with 2 in October, maybe 1, maybe 2 in November if we do it.
I think you skip December, you come back in January.
Yeah.
February, we have a wrap up, we take February to write the actions and probably check in with them in March-ish. And then that gives us a few months. What?
Is that March-ish?
March, April-ish,
Yeah.
And then we start to compile the actual report. I mean, in the background, Susan and I can be working on compiling all these elements as well. So maybe we don't have it flushed out in the right format, but we can start to put together, start to gather the census data and historical stuff and get the letters, and we'll have to get some pictures at Easter at the market or something. We're gonna have So
You,
Aaron will have to get some pictures for us at the senior center when they get back over there. So Aaron, start taking some pictures of our community.
I have a question for you.
What's your question?
I don't know, I forgot it.
I think we should
So
space them
what's
out,
going
like,
on?
I don't know if I would do one once a month, but I would like to say every 3 weeks if we can, like, so it looks a little like more than just twice a month. That seems a little intense.
It's, what I'm thinking would be like 2 in October, maybe 1 in November because of the election schedule, 1 in December, as long as we can do it early in the month, not anywhere past like the 10th. And then 1 in January, 1 in February, you know. But, are you still gonna have your regular meetings along the way, is what I was gonna ask you.
I think we have to.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there has to be a way for the domain groups to be sharing information with each other, right? And so whether there's minutes taken from those meetings or a report of some kind that gets shared amongst the other domains. But I think it's really important to get together to talk about what are the issues we're having or what, you know, what's going on. I think that'll be really important. You know, I guess we'll figure out whether that needs to be every month or do we, what does that schedule look like? But I know for myself running the group, I don't want to feel like I'm doing that in isolation of what the others are doing either.
No, and I think it'll be important because the likelihood that Susan and I are going to attend all these meetings, I mean, we're talking
30 meetings.
plus, 30 plus, like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I'm gonna commit to, I know that Carol and Aaron take attendance, and I'm gonna say right now that I might miss 2 of these little work groups, so I'm just throwing it out there. You may have to, I'll figure out my attendance policy, but
Work groups are,
different attendance policy than
yeah,
task
they
force.
don't fall under our ordinance. So it's
Okay.
like you miss 2 in a row. You know.
I won't get kicked off the task force.
I know what you're trying to do.
I just want to protect my, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. So I feel like we're gonna have a set agenda, we're gonna have some objectives. I'm gonna work with Carol and Susan to come up with some timelines of when those meetings would be, as well as a much broader timeline for kind of what we're gonna do so that we can get on the phone with AARP and walk through our plan. Well, really present our plan and then not really leave it up for negotiation, just this is when you will be receiving our plan. We'll see what comes back.
This is when we anticipate.
Yes. Anything else about the kickoff meeting?
You want to do it in September.
Well, okay, not the kickoff meeting, but but at some point I have a thought about what Cleveland called the existing state, and how we summarize for each domain existing programs and services.
Okay, why don't you cover that now? Why we have that momentum going.
So we have a spreadsheet which has which identifies members of the city's management team who have knowledge in certain areas, and that identifies subject matter experts. And I think each of us who is responsible for a domain should be responsible for coordinating presentations by those experts at the kickoff of each domain meeting. And assembling data that, you know, maybe existing, you know, reports or lists or whatever of available, you know, city programs and services, nonprofit programs and services, but make sure that you're putting that onto those staff, you know, staff managers and subject matter experts to make those presentations, not that we necessarily as the liaison to a domain have to do it ourselves.
Okay.
And that's a big bite, but I would be willing to organize that and you know, list who, you know, maybe the top 3 or 4 people in each group are going to be the ones you want to talk with to get them lined up to make to present our current circumstances.
So Charlene, let me ask a question. So should that, I think that's really important to include that information. Should that come before we've reviewed the data, or do we review the data first? This is what the community has told us essentially. And then talk about what we already have, like what should be, I guess I'm wondering to help Sarah with sort of the order of these meetings, what should come first?
I think the community needs should come first.
Yeah.
The results of our research and our focus groups, because so many times people in those groups would say, well, you know what we really need is X, and they don't realize that we have X. And so, you know, we need the description of existing programs and services to counterbalance that and to winnow down the complaints, as it were, from the focus groups and the quantitative research.
Yeah, I think so too. And I also think it feels different for participants because it might, this is what we heard, I think is important to put out there first, right? So that it doesn't come across like, I don't know. I just worry about how it might be perceived if we did this is what we're already doing first. So that's, I agree with you, is what I'm saying.
Going back to Boston, if you go down for a lot of the reports, let's just say it was started out with what we envisioned, what we heard, what we are, and what we will. And so I think you follow that similar format, right? So maybe the envision might be where they talk about what they think would be the grand, big things, or, you know, maybe they do some just general brainstorming, they come up with their values for their particular work group. Then what we heard, that's where you get into the data, right? And then what we are is where you bring in all the current things that are going on. And then they spend the next few meetings talking about what we will want to achieve, right? So you follow that format, that's the way, if that's how we want to collect let's just assume that's the format we select. I'm not saying it is, but if that's the kind of how we're going to report on the data, that seems like the cadence that you'd want them to follow.
It makes sense.
I agree.
It's many of the reports that I read followed that structure, and it would make sense to say, here's what we heard, and then we have the experts say, well, we can answer these questions already because this is what exists, and what you're left with are the gaps.
Yeah.
And the gaps would then form what your action plans are.
Right. That's how I look at it. So that's how I was thinking they would kind of move through it, but sounds like we're aligned from that perspective. I mean, whether we use those words or not, that's kind of how we want to move through the work groups.
That makes the most sense to me too.
Okay. All right. Susan McKee, we needed you last month because I couldn't remember. Shocking. I know that I couldn't remember something. Does the work group have to be 50% experts and 50% residents? But residents and experts can't overlap. They have to be one or the other. Is that how I remember the work group?
Yeah, so residents have to be at least 50%.
Okay.
And I believe I'd have to double check, Sarah, but I think that's correct, that a subject area expert is not, just because they're a resident.
One or the other. You're either a subject matter expert or you're participating as a resident. You can't double dip that you were one of each.
Right.
That's what I thought.
So essentially they wear one hat or the other. They either wear the resident hat or the expert hat. Okay.
Right. So, I mean, I guess going back to that, I think of our list, if we have our, you know, the people that we're partnering with and our city staff, they get to wear the expert hat, and then everybody else falls into the resident hat.
Yeah, because you don't want city staff
as a resident
who happen to live in the city. Yeah, like because it ends up skewing things too much. You want to make sure your residents are well represented.
So you gotta pick what side of the fence you wanna be on. Okay. So, any other things that we wanna make sure we cover in some of these meetings, whether it be our kickoff meeting or our work group meetings? I feel like we're getting there. Because the next subject is like, what do we need for templates and things like that? And so, I'm just trying to make sure we're starting to put some of this structure in place.
So I'm going to go back to my earlier question again, not that we have to answer it tonight, but we should decide when, how, and we're going to answer it. And that is, who defines the goal of each domain? Is it us or is it the work group?
I could argue either one, you know.
Right.
No, that's why I'm asking.
Exactly.
I guess my position is if you're going to have a work group, I would think to make it worth their while, that we would want that work group to define the goal of what they're doing. Because otherwise, why are they there?
They're there to help us figure out how we're gonna fill in the gaps. See, to me, I see where we're all headed with this, and I can argue both ways. For me, the reason that they're in these meetings is to help us, it's really create an action to come up with ways to fill the gaps. It's not a very articulate way to say it, but you know what I'm saying? I don't know, I mean, we've given them our vision and our mission that's been endorsed by this task force. I think if they want to come up with their guiding, like, value statements, maybe, you know, like, what's your there was a couple of those reports that I looked at, there was like topics to consider, you know, like they talk about dementia and some other things, like maybe, I don't know, guys. Do we want 6 more vision and mission statements?
I don't want a vision and mission statement. I just want a goal that falls down from and derives from our existing vision and mission.
So isn't their goal, so what would you consider to be the goal of communication and information?
It would be a broad statement that says the city should, use all available channels to provide relevant information, either on an as-needed basis or on a regular schedule.
Okay.
That was bad, but a broad statement. We need to communicate thoroughly with everyone about everything.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so maybe that's part of their first meeting is they need to come up with their objective.
I kind of think so, and I think that'll be fun and productive for them.
And I think it helps to give them some ownership to the process too, right? So it gets them sort of engaged in what it is that they're trying to achieve. And I think it's a good grounding exercise to get started with for sure.
I absolutely agree.
I am looking at the ARP Real Possibilities page called Identifying Priorities and Establishing Smart Goals. This is for the work teams. And it basically says, here's your domain. And then it asks questions, what's working? What do we have and what's working? What's not working so well? What environmental factors might be contributing to that? And then where do we go from here? So I'm thinking that the goals would then fall into the domain work groups because they're the closest to that. I'm with the housing, but I don't get the communication thing. So it would be silly, I think, for me to set communication goals when I'm further from the data. And the housing folks have the housing data, and they would have a pretty good handle, I think, on setting goals for how they would like to see that progress in the next short-term, long-term.
Okey-dokey.
One of the things I'm a bit concerned about is the data, and how to make that digestible and accessible so that we're not handing people, 300 somewhere in the focus group. What? So I don't feel like we have really made, like we've each been sort of handed the data for each of the domain groups, but then now what the heck do we do with that? Like, how do we summarize that in a way that's usable for the working group so that it's not an onerous thing for them to get through?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I need to, I have all like the aspiration worksheets. I have all the data. I just need to spend some time with it, Susan. So I can take a stab at some ideas. How's that? I can present you guys some different ways that we can do it based on what I have available, if you'd like. I don't disagree that it's, I don't know how to give it to somebody so that they can make sense of it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I can barely make sense of it.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
did anyone do like kind of thematic analysis of
Yes,
so we have those pieces and those numbers
generally, yeah.
generally, okay.
I can
this
show you
kind of
what we have.
packaging.
Yeah, I can show you what we have. There's some stuff in Excel. There's verbatims that we took notes, like there's scribe notes. We have a holistic of like, I think Erin went through and said like, these are the themes, right, that she heard and she counted them. We have some graphs around that. Would you guys agree? I'm trying to think, Alexis.
Yeah, she did some key themes based on, and I don't know, I can't
I don't know if
remember.
they're based on aspirations or if they were based on the
Right.
focus groups.
Right. I think there was a whole lot of data that didn't really get looked at because it was like so broad, but I think she did pull out key themes from the focus groups.
I think I need to go through the aspiration sheets and see if that data lives anywhere.
So let me suggest something, and Susan Barkman can like push back at this, but what if we turned that over to Susan Barkman, a completely fresh pair of eyes? I mean, we've got a lot of raw material, and she might be in a position to see themes and common denominators that we are too immersed in. And Susan, if I'm just dumping stuff on you and you don't want to do it, you just say so.
Let me look at the data and see what we've got, see what's in there. But like I've done some reports that kind of take a lot of survey and a lot of comments and notes and things and really digest it into like a page of here's what we kind of loosely heard, and it plugs in some quotes. It makes it really digestible. And then you could always say as well, that becomes a cover sheet, right? So here's the summary. Here's what we're hearing. And if you really want to, here are like the 300 surveys for you to like dive into. And depending on kind of how you do it, you could kind of say, highlight, we could do some color coding or something and kind of highlight it or make it a little bit more relevant for each group. So we can look at that. But yeah, I'll look at it and throw a fresh set of eyes on it and see where we land.
Yeah, because we've got such different, we've got the survey, which provides us with more quantitative type data, but then the focus groups is all qualitative, right? And it's pages and pages and pages from those. So they're very different. The information likely that you'd pull from each source would be quite different.
And what I don't know if we have it captured in anywhere is the actual aspiration worksheets. So I mean, I have them at my house.
Right.
But I mean, I don't know, I can't think of where, like, I need to see that I think the scribe notes are great, but it doesn't mean they capture the aspirations. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I can dig into that, and Susan, you and I can meet at some point and I can hand it over to you and you can help look at it. I just need to understand it a little more.
We can review the electronic files to see if Alexis did kind of
She's
create
gonna have a
any-
folder in
some-
there, so I just have to look.
Yeah, some reports,
Uh-huh.
exactly.
I don't disagree, Susan. I was thinking about that this whole time. I'm like, I don't know what you'd actually do with it. And you're like, welcome to the domain group. Here's a whole bunch of paper. Good luck. All right, you're so excited. You signed up for the next 3 years, and here is like 500 pages of big data to read through. Yay! Welcome to the domain groups.
My memory of the meetings that we had with the folks, the public ones, we asked for aspirations. I don't know that our participants really had a good grasp of what an aspiration was.
No,
And
there might be some good ideas in there.
there might be. And
There might be some nuggets.
I think we're going to be better off with the comments that we have all typed up and whatnot, because we can look at the aspirations, but I just have this sense lurking in the back of this very long memory that we're not going to find a lot of really good data on looking at what the public wrote down for aspirations. Because I just don't think they had a really good feel for what that meant.
No, but I also don't want to like withhold something that could be good. I mean, like,
Oh,
that's
yes.
part of the data set. That's part of the data set, whether it's good, bad, or ugly.
Right, I don't think we should ignore it.
No, so like, if it's not captured somewhere, I think it's important that we include that as part of the package. Again, it could be that it's just available to them to read through if they want to go that deep, but like, we do need to include it as part of the data set.
And this, I think, is a really important impetus for us to get IT on the OneDrive so that these groups all have access to these things and they're all on OneDrive.
Yeah,
I think
it's
that's
gonna be a nightmare.
I think
If we don't have some kind of
Yeah.
central location that at least this task force has access to, because I'm guessing we're going to have a role. I'm not, you guys are all the leads in these, but we're gonna have a role that's some kind of secretary or scribe of like, we're gonna need somebody to help you capture information in these meetings. Because facilitating and capturing notes is not
No.
ideal. I'm just gonna throw it. It can be done, but I want you guys to focus on the facilitation of the group and moving them through the process. Not worrying about, did I capture all the stuff that they're saying? So I think it's important that we at least have identified somebody to do that, and they're gonna need to have access to upload that information somewhere.
So I feel like an August 1st deadline to our IT department to have that up and running for the group so that you guys have time to put stuff on there that you want to have available right at the kickoff meeting, that you'll be able to say at the kickoff meeting, we have this information, here's where it's stored on OneDrive, here's how you access it. So I feel like I can go to IT tomorrow with Paul's support and say, we'd really like this up and running by August 1st. It's really vital to this task force.
I think that's a really good idea. And I don't know that everybody needs write access, but I think everybody needs read access.
Oh, absolutely.
Just so it's functional. You can figure out.
I'm pretty big on your data.
So a question that maybe we don't have to, probably running a little late to answer tonight, but I think we need to articulate the roles in each domain. That is, there will be one of us assigned to each domain. Will we also want to appoint an independent chair for that domain and another member to act as a scribe? Or are we the scribes?
No, you're the facilitators, right?
I hope I'm not the scribe. That's my least that's my least wonderful talent.
I don't believe that for a second, John, but you know, I mean, we can call our roles, whatever, we can define the roles. I think let's add that to the agenda for next month. Let's talk through and identify these roles. I agree, it's getting late. I think we're all getting tired. But I do think whatever role you want to call yourself, you guys are the facilitators of these meetings. Like you're kind of not necessarily setting the agenda, but like keeping people on task, making sure the dynamics are working, you're getting good information, because ultimately you guys know, quote unquote, the structure that we need to report it back into, right? So like you're helping this guide this group to be able to get to the point that they need to be at in, we'll say February, with the information that we need for this report. So I don't know if we need a lot of rules, but I think you guys need to stay out of scribe stuff so you can focus on the task at hand. And so I would at least recommend one other person. And we can debate whether we need chairs and vice chairs and all that stuff.
I think, yeah, I agree. I think minimally you do need to have a scribe. You need to have someone who's taking minutes, because the fact of the matter is Carol, Aaron, and myself cannot be at every meeting all the time. And especially if we're going to do a couple meetings at the same time, we can't be in, it's not a bad idea. We just can't, I can't be in two places at once.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if Char's playing, we're on 3. Yeah. So like I'm gonna have to join the team scribe, and so yeah. But think about some other roles and what they might be, guys, and we'll tackle that in the next meeting. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. Char, you had asked a question we put in the parking lot a long time ago. Did we get through it or not?
Yeah, the question was who should define each domain's goal, and I think the consensus was that the work groups should define their goal.
Okay, just want to make sure we came back to it and I didn't permanently parking lot it.
Yep.
Sometimes I do that. Yeah. All right. So based on that, I think we need to not tonight. For our next meeting, I think we need to start tackling kind of how we want, like maybe once we see the meeting cadence, then we'll start to identify what we need to collect the right information from those meetings, and we can start to think about, I'm happy to take a con and doing the templates for them and things like that. But I think we need to start to identify some of that kind of stuff so that we're prepared. Again, this packet of stuff we need to have accessible for them. Would you guys agree?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So next meeting, we'll go through the meeting stuff. We'll go deeper into that once we kind of see what the schedule looks like. So then we can start to think about the support that we need for those. Does that work for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. I'm losing steam here. Okay.
I'm also thinking about, because next meeting is July for us, right?
Yes.
And how much we have to have done and ready to go if the kickoff is going to be in September. So I'm just really thinking about making sure that where do we need to be in September? So what all has to be completed so that we're ready to go? Because I think about even just figuring out who's going to be and sending out invitations for people to participate in each of the groups, and like there's a lot of pieces that need to be. And next meeting is July already.
You do need to talk about that because you've been meeting the first Monday in July, and that's how. So so first Tuesday, so it's not delayed.
Yeah.
But besides that, city commission.
I think that's an excellent point. Because I don't want to be at trying to scramble to put a framework around what we're going to do on our start date. I'd like to have that pretty well put to bed so that when I walk in that meeting, it's just going to go. And if it turns out, I guess I'd like us to be open to saying, you know, September was a lovely idea. It's not achievable based on what we have to put together. And the summer, I think perhaps you don't feel the same as I do, but if we have a working session in July and a working session in August, will we actually then be ready to go in September? Because that would give us 2 monthly meetings, well, 3 if you count September. We still have to get the invites out. What's a reasonable time for that? So I think we need to pay some attention to the quantity of structure that we have to build, and then determine if September is a reasonable deadline. Are we going to be hurt much if we wait till October to get this rolling?
So I made it pretty clear to the city manager when we were talking about Susan Barkman's role that this was what we needed from staff. That is, we as committee members can conceptualize things, but when it comes to centralizing, you know, a spreadsheet and a database and sending emails out and getting these things organized, that's where we would turn to Susan Barkman for her services. And again, I'm you know, freely assigning her work, but that is consistent with what I discussed with the city manager. So I think at some point she's going to step in and say, okay, guys, here's the schedule. Like it or lump it.
I think, so this is my thoughts. Next meeting, we need to review, let's talk about the data package. And Susan Barkman and I will meet and have a proposal, or we'll at least talk through some different strategies around the data. Okay, so that's Susan and I will work on that. We will review our meeting schedule that Carol will get me tomorrow. I will have Erin's incredible notes to look at what we're going to cover in those. So I'll create like one-pagers of like, this is what we're going to cover in those meetings, some ideas. I will have an outline of what we'll cover in the kickoff meeting. We will pull up our spreadsheet and we will start to look through that at the next meeting and start to talk about who's still invited and how do we want to structure those. So we'll talk about the people, the who, then Susan could take that and run if we decide, you know, if we need to contact these people, you know, we can talk through that at the next meeting. And then, does that work for everybody? So July, we're gonna make some serious progress into the who and when to help us identify, and also Susan and I will meet and go through the overall timeline for the project based on that Excel spreadsheet that we have that kind of walks through month by month what we're supposed to be accomplishing. She and I will go through that and see and meet with the AARP to get sign off on our timeline. Does that make everyone feel a little better? Like, then we can make a decision on September. Is at the end of our meeting next month, we will make a decision if September is a go or no go.
You could always do an extra meeting in August, and you could always do a meeting in September and have a later September kickoff.
Yep, I know. So that works. We will make a decision at the next meeting if September is a go or if we're going to push it back. But what I think we also need to do is understand pushing it to October. What does that do to the overall timeline? So like, I don't think I can make that, we can make that decision without seeing what we really need to like gather a little bit more deep into what does our overall timeline look like. And so every month that we push it could be butting us up, like putting us in a worse position in the back end. So like, we'll have that information to present at the next meeting for this group so that we can make an educated and informed decision about where we are and what we think we can accomplish over the next couple of months.
And even if that means that we, as Joan kind of alluded to, that we have a couple of informal working sessions to knock some stuff off, you know, I'm certainly open to that too. I'm mindful of, okay, there's only 2 meetings between now and September. So formal meetings. So are we able to, so no, that sounds great.
So I think let's look at the overall stuff and then we can make some decisions.
Really happy to have you, Susan.
Yes.
Welcome.
Sure.
Well, she hasn't run out the door yet, so I guess we're okay.
I have them all barred.
Yes. All right.
I guess I would also like, as it's available, if you could provide links to where this information will be, so that I can look it over before the next meeting, if it's possible.
I will certainly try.
If you can't, you can't. Do the best you can. I just feel like I'm flying blind sometimes, and I don't like it, but that's just me.
Okay, we'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can work on as an interim solution while we're working with the technology team here at the city of Royal Oak. Carol's gonna push hard. We just went to like 6 boiling pots now, so they've gone from like a simmer to like exponentially an entire kitchen on fire.
They went to, are they getting their vacation carryovers or not?
Yeah, okay, wow. All right, you guys.
Big guns.
To sound like we have a good plan for next meeting, we will try to get you things as they become available.
Okay. So our meeting will be July 5th.
No, it's gonna be the following, yeah.
So
It'll be July 6th.
Monday, July 5th is a holiday, so that we don't push it off too long, I would suggest Tuesday, July 6th. And I would
Okay.
suggest, if possible, you begin to move to an in-person. Because come August, you'll have to meet in person. There won't be a state of emergency at that point, so it's just my thought that the sooner you can move into that situation, the better it is for you.
Well, July 6th is fine with me. If that's agreeable to other people.
All right, we can tackle that. I will work with Carol to figure that all out. Is there anything on the agenda that we didn't cover that you guys want to cover now? My head's a little swirly from all the stuff we did cover, so I don't know if there's anything left.
I have nothing.
Thank you, Sue Wells. We miss hearing your voice, seeing your beautiful face.
I'm taking it in. I had a long day.
I know, me too. All right. I see 0 public comment.
Got it?
That was the fastest public comment ever. All right, moving on to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
All right, Paul says adjourn. Who wants to second that bad boy?
Joan seconds.
Joan seconds, I'm gonna vote. Commissioner Douglas,
Aye.
Sue Wells,
Yes.
Joan Johnson,
Yes.
Paul Webb,
Yes.
Susan McKee,
Yes.
and I say aye. So thank you, everyone. Look forward to another productive meeting. Have a great month.
If anybody,
Thanks.
if anybody knows anybody who knows anybody who wants to be a lifeguard, let me know.
Okay.